You know, I've been involved in this tank racket now for a very long time, since the age of 7, and non-stop since then I've been building tank models in all sorts of scales, static, motorized, radio control. I've been researching them, I've been studying them, I've been designing parts for them, I've seen them in real life, I've seen them in museums and tank shows, and basically everything else in between. And after a while, you come to the conclusion that you've seen basically everything that there is to see. So it's always a real treat when you truly stumble upon something that you never knew existed or you've truly never seen before. And when that opportunity happens, that is when things get very interesting. Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a model showcase video for this 1/35th scale Soviet early production SU-122-54 tank destroyer. The model that we have here is built for my own personal collection. It's not for sale and or purchase. However, as I often mention in these build videos, I frequently take on commission build projects from models ranging between 1/35th scale and 1/6 scale. For availability and pricing information, that would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@EastCoastArmory.com. This model here is built predominantly out of the box, and there is a ton of information to go over in this video, because this kit here is definitely not a simple or an easy build by any stretch of the imagination. Because of that, this is going to be a longer format video, so stay tuned and relax, because in this video, not only are we going to be giving this model a thorough in-box review, but I'm also going to be highlighting many of the aspects of this kit, as well as areas to watch out for. And on this kit over here, there's going to be quite a few. So stay tuned and enjoy. If you dig post-war Soviet military vehicles and Soviet armor, you're definitely going to be in for a treat with this video over here. So let's go ahead and kick this one off. And in order to properly kick this video off, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around this model. And this vehicle here is the SU-122-54 SPG. This vehicle here is one that's very, very interesting because it's one of the last casemate designs that was designed in the post-war years across the Iron Curtain. During the World War II time frame, of course, there were many vehicles that fit this type of a role that were used by both the Allies and the Axis. However, post-World War II, the casemate design kind of went the way of the dodo bird and was something that fizzed off into the trash bin of history. But there were a few holdouts. In the West, we have the West German Kanone, and on the East, we had vehicles like the ASU-85 and the SU-122-54. These units date back to 1955, and for the basis, they utilize the hull and the running gear, not to mention the automotive components, from the T-54A family of Soviet main battle tanks. However, the two vehicles are slightly different. It's not just a straight-up T-55 hull, as the spacing on the wheels on this vehicle are slightly different compared to the ones found on the counterpart. Outside of that, however, the two are basically identical for most regards. Of course, the obvious difference between the two vehicles is that one has a fully revolving turret, and this one here has a casemate design with a giant 122mm D49 L48 main armament. Just like as we saw in World War II, the reason why they went with the casemate design was because in order to fit a armament with the caliber of a 122 onto a platform like the T-55, it just would not have been feasible to put this in a turret, so they went with the casemate design, which allows you to put something that's really large in caliber on a smaller platform. In addition to the 122, it also utilized two KP-VT heavy MGs. One was to be mounted in a coax position. They definitely learned not to do the mistake that the Germans did with the other vehicles that were similar to this. And they also mounted a secondary one on top of the roof for use for AA. However, due to the size of the armament and the armor protection, in typical Soviet fashion, this thing did not have that much ammunition stored on the inside, and in total it had about 35 rounds of main armament. However, this vehicle did enter into production and was produced from 1955 to about 1957, and about 77 units were completed. Of course, with 77 units produced, these are a very rare vehicle that were produced by the Soviet Union, specifically when you compare that to the other vehicles produced at that time, which number in the tens of thousands. As it turns out, a vehicle in this format just really wasn't that useful to the Soviet High Command, so they didn't really produce that many of them. However, this vehicle did see service with the Red Army throughout the 1960s timeframe, and most notably saw service with the invasion of Czechoslovakia. Into the early 1970s, there was an upgrade program to retrofit many of these vehicles by removing the main armament and transforming them into a tractor of sorts that can be used for a multitude of different activities. The vehicle continued to see service in this format for a number of decades afterwards. At the end, there are a number of these vehicles still left today, and all of them, of course, are housed in Eastern European tank museums. Before we continue with the video, let's go ahead and take a step back to when the model was first started in order to get a good idea on what the base starter kit supplies you with. And here's the model at the start of the build. For the base starter kit, I'll be utilizing this 1/35 scale SU-122-54 early pattern Soviet tank destroyer from Miniart. This model here truly is a recent addition to the stash. This one here has been sitting in the stash for about 6 months or so, possibly a little less, and was one that I've been eagerly anticipating getting to it and starting it, giving you the review build video that you are watching currently. Part of the reason why I've been anticipating and eagerly awaiting to start this project over here was, like I mentioned in the video intro, I honestly had no idea that this vehicle was even in existence. I was aware of several of the other Soviet Cold War era turretless casemate type vehicles like the ASU-85. However, this one here was one that truly did catch me off guard. This kit was recently acquired off of eBay, and I paid roughly about 50 to 60 some odd US dollars for it, which is the going rate for these particular kits. The kit in question, of course, is from the Ukrainian company Miniart, and Miniart is a relatively new addition to the kit modeling circuit. They've only been around for, I want to say, maybe 10, 15 years, if that. However, they've really carved a nice little niche in the market by producing some very excellent and high quality plastic military model kits. These kits here were released by Miniart back in 2018. And when this kit was released, it was released in a series where they produced a bunch of different variants of this exact same vehicle in different configurations. This one here is the early pattern. They also produced the late pattern, and then they have 2 or 3 other versions of the exact same platform, but without the main armaments, and there's other configurations along those lines. One of the more unique ones is the version with the mine roller. However, those are all topics for another video. One thing that I found very interesting about this company is that, unlike several other plastic kit companies out there that outsource their production to China, Miniart does everything in-house in their facility in the Ukraine. Back to the actual kit in question over here. Like I mentioned before, Miniart released this kit back in 2018. And Miniart is the first company to produce this pattern of vehicle in a plastic kit format. However, they are not the first kit company to ever produce this kit. That honor would go to some resin manufacturer where they released this model as a full resin kit, and it also came with a set of workable track links. However, with resin kits being what they are, obviously the market would much better prefer models made in this type of media for several reasons, and Miniart answered the mail by producing this kit here a number of years later. But like with many things in this hobby, this is not the only option available for this pattern of vehicle, because Hobby Boss themselves a year later would throw their hat into the ring with their variant of the exact same vehicle. As for how the two stack side by side, unfortunately I don't have the Hobby Boss one, so I can't really do a proper head-to-head. But it is an honorable mention since I am obviously talking about this particular kit in question. And there's nothing really much more that needs to be said about that. So let's go ahead and actually start with the review. Here we have the model's box art and graphic design. One thing about Miniart is that they have some very nice box arts to them. And whoever the illustrator is who they work with, the individual does a fantastic job. In fact, it's because of these box arts why I have a few other of their kits in my stash that will definitely be coming their way to this table soon enough. Definitely something to watch out for. Starting with the actual composition itself, here we have the vehicle right here in the foreground, and I gotta say that the detailing on the vehicle is excellent, to the point where I doubt that this is an actual painting. If anything, it looks like a photograph, as well as the whole image itself looks like to be a composition that was done in Photoshop, and then they went ahead and added some cool posterization effects to give the look that you see here. Regardless, the composition is excellent. So again, here we have the vehicle right here in question. It's zipping down this dirt road. We have some trees as well as some Katyushas just firing off in the background. And we also have a little hare that's zipping across the road in front of the tank. I think he's going to make it. He's going to be fine. It's fine. It's fine. He's not going to get hit or anything. Yeah, no, I'm going to be an optimist and say he's going to be okay. So that's the basic illustration here. As for the typography, Miniart likes to use this type of typeface, and something I've seen on several other of their kits, namely their Cold War pattern vehicles that they do have a range of. It's 1/35 scale. The kit number is 37035, and right next to the little bunny over here, you can see the Miniart logo. The remainder of the graphic design is actually something I find quite interesting. On a lot of their newer kits, they have this bright orange type side pattern, which again, it's great, it's eye-catching, and it's something where if you see it in a hobby shop, you're definitely going to be looking at it. So on the side tab over here, where we have a thumbnail of the vehicle on the front illustration, but with just a orange background to go with it. The info, kit number, the logo, and it's the same thing on the opposite side. On this side over here, we have some corporate information, along with Miniart's address, as well as their website. On this side over here, we have some really cool illustrations on the various decal options that I'm pretty sure this vehicle does come with. And again, very minimalistic, but very eye-catching box design indeed. The model is still factory sealed, and Miniart seals these pattern kits with these two disc type stickers that are found on each side of the box. Although I have seen Miniart kits that are also conventionally sealed with the shrink wrap, so it just depends on the kit that you are working on. Alright, so I'm opening this kit up for the very first time, and I do have an idea of what's inside of it from just looking at some pictures online, but this is the first time I'm actually seeing this thing in the flesh. At quick glance, you'll notice that the entire model is molded in this gray polystyrene plastic. This is something that I have seen before on other Miniart products that I have personally worked on. Although, this model here will be the first full Miniart tank kit that I will be building for my collection. The other Miniart products I worked on in the past were a set of workable track links that were for a Sherman pattern of vehicle. On the ECA channel, I have the video in question where I utilize those tracks, and I even have a full independent video that shows the assembly of those workable track links and how to fit them to that exact model. If anyone is curious on exactly how they go together or the quality or my recommendations on those track sets, I definitely recommend checking them out. Again, the link can be found in the video description listed below. Back to the model that we have here, all the components are nicely sealed in one giant plastic bag, which definitely streamlines things a bit. There's some other items in the bottom of the box, but we'll touch upon those momentarily. Go ahead and set this aside and get this large bag here opened up. Okay, with the main sarcophagus bag out of the way, it now subdivides into two other smaller bags. I'll start with the bigger bag first. Alright, as you can see, this model has a ton of parts, so it's going to be quite a in-depth build. Okay, with all the parts out of the sprues, let's go ahead and start with the bigger ones and work our way down. So, this sprue here contains what is clearly the tank's lower hull. The hull on this model here is a multi-part assembly, which is something that it's not too uncommon. It's been seen on several other builds that I've touched upon in the past. But as for the plastic quality itself, it's on par with, again, it's the exact same material as was mentioned before on those workable track link sets. The detailing on the molded-on components are excellent. And it basically feels like a contemporary plastic model kit. The type of kits that you would see from Dragon or Trumpeter, you know, any other one of the peers of this type of tooling that we see here. On the engine hatch over there, you can see some nice hinge work. And we also have some limited interior detailing right over there. That's a firewall of some sort. The details on the casemate, you can see the weld beads that are present. Exhaust deflector, as well as the remainder of the side hull details. On the side portion there, we have the T-34-esque track pin knocker, which is the best way to put it. And everything looks to be very nicely executed. Next runner that we have here consists of a ton of stamped sheet metal type gas cans, which have that iconic Soviet stamping shape to them. Again, the quality on all these parts look to be very good. In addition to the cans, we also see several tin work type braces and things along those lines. We have some really intricate components right over there, which look to be plumbing of some sort, or I believe those might actually be the tin work levers that it's like a spring mechanism that keeps the front flap from moving around. But regardless of what they are, very finely molded. This is definitely a kit I am not going to recommend for beginners. I can just tell you right off the bat just now. Carry on, takes us to this runner that we have here. Again, a plethora of extremely finely detailed molded parts. We even have the infamous Soviet log that's right over here. That's a common trait found on these Soviet pattern vehicles. The log itself is rendered, I mean, it's a log, you can tell. This runner here, we have some final drive external mounts, we have some more sections of tin work, as well as some rear vent work that would be present on the rear portion of the engine deck. I am seeing some more tin work supports. I'm pretty sure this kit's going to give you quite a few spares, but we'll see how that pans out during construction. One thing I just noticed about the tin work is that it has both external and internal stamping details. Again, a very nice touch. Some more smaller bits. Fuel cans. This one here is a slide mold, so it is a single piece molding, which means no seam work to worry about on that component there. And it looks like there's a few versions of this runner. I can see, no, it's just the same runner just repeated twice. And there are some other things I can see that are duplicates, but I'll touch upon that in a moment. We see the toe shackles, or I should say the tow cable hooks right there on the front. Here's the stamp pattern on the fuel can, as well as the fuel can mounts. Again, everything is very finely molded. And just really indicative of good quality. Here we have another double runner, which consists of what I believe are some suspension components, i.e. the torsion bar mounts, shovel, some more hooks, a lot of stuff. This is going to be a fun one. Definitely, this is going to be a fun one. Here we have a runner that's in triplets, and again, just more components upon more components upon more components, and each one of these are equally as nicely rendered as the last. As for what they are, as far as I can tell, looks like more suspension bits. The next set of runners is again the same part as duplicated, and it contains the components for, I believe that is a 25mm autocannon, if I'm not mistaken. I'm a little hazy on it. I have seen parts kits for these on Apex Gun Parts, but it is nicely detailed. I have seen these pieces in the flesh before, and yes, it definitely has the look and feel of the actual component. One thing that's nice is that the flash suppressor here is molded hollow, which is a very nice little feature, and generally something I have to do with a pin vise. So that's not the case on this one over here. We have here another set of triple parts. These appear to be bump stops of one flavor or another, as well as a few other gizmos. Not really sure what they are specifically at the moment, but I can tell you one thing, they are nicely molded. This runner over here contains some periscope top covers, or at least to me what appears to be periscope top covers. And again, just lots of little pins and other things that you really don't want breaking during removal. I can already tell you right off the bat, a pair of clean cut snips is going to be your best friend for this kit over here. The last of the small runners contains this set, which looks like it contains components to assemble the ammunition box, as well as the cradle for that piece of armament that I touched upon before. On the can itself, you can see that it has the embossed stamp detailing, which is present on a Soviet ammo can, as well as that little star right there in the center. The last of these two small runners consists of components to assemble the idler, as well as the sprocket, or I should say at least the sprocket face. And the parts are very, very intricately molded. Moving on to the last two sprues takes us to this one over here, which appears to be the tin work. Note the hinge detailing is integrally molded on, which is excellent, but the flaps themselves are separate moldings, which allows you the ability to either render this with the flaps in the closed or open position. You can see some other engine deck details, including that barrel of fun. That's going to be really, yeah, I'm going to be walking on pins and needles taking that off of the sprue. And on the inner portion over here, we have some interior details. And it appears that not only do you have the inner stamping embossed details, but it appears that it has several suggestion points for photo etch to have those rigidity strips that are present on these T-55 pattern of mud flaps. And if anyone has seen my Israeli Tehran 5 video in 116, I go into that in more depth. But it's an iconic bit of detailing, or I should say it's a really awesome bit of detailing, and it's one that's not really that visible, but Miniart got you covered on that one, or at least so it seems. And the final runner that we have here consists of everything that makes this the vehicle that we have here. So this is the top portion of the finding compartment, the front armored glacis plate of said finding compartment, the mantlet, which has some really awesome geometry and detailing to it. Note the tarpaulin mount that is integrally molded on. The rotor right over there. It's a multi-part assembly, which means it's going to be very highly detailed. I absolutely love the mount. I mean, if you love those giant fasteners on the Jagd Panther, yeah, this thing here, it's like the Jagd Panther on steroids. There goes the main breech. It is a two-part assembly. And there's the main tube, which is a single molding, which is awesome. Generally, this is a two-part assembly, but for this one here, they went with the single approach. The other components consist of the recuperators, the brake, which you can see is a two-part assembly. This is something you are going to have to do some seam removal with, but apparently they even did the inner detailing on the brake itself. I'm talking about the rigidity rib that would be found on the casting on the real one. Just an awesome bit of equipment. We have here some clear components in the forms of two runners. These consist of Soviet pattern of periscopes, headlights, taillights, basically anything reflective. Note the detailing on the interior portion of the periscope is all integrally molded. Very nice quality. I believe the other runner is the same exact runner, so it's just a duplicate. And here we have the decals. Water slide decals printed on blue paper. I have never built a Miniart model before, so I don't know how well these will work on the model, if, you know, how will they take to the varnish and all that stuff. But so far from what I've seen from everything else, everything seems to be high quality, and I don't doubt that these decals here will definitely be reflective of that. This leads us to the final bag here of parts. That's a lot of parts. Okay, so this sprue over here contains specific components for this pattern of vehicle, namely the sprocket, as well as also a different pattern of idler. This one here, from what I saw from the box art, has the earlier pattern of T-54 or T-55 front idler wheel, and those details are represented on these moldings here. We also have several of the swing arms, and I think they are a two-piece assembly, which is quite interesting. Generally, these are just a single-piece molding, but not on this model over here. It's going to be interesting to see how that all assembles and goes together. As one would imagine, this is a type of set that you have two runners for. So already I can already see that there's going to be quite a few spare parts. And the remainder of the frets look to be just more of the same parts, just reproduced over and over and over again, as they are consisting of the swing arms, and the swing arms are again a two-piece assembly, which again is something that you don't really see very often. So that is, actually I gotta see, this is probably the first time I've ever saw that. So there you go. No point showing all of those or all the same examples on camera, so I'll just get over to the next runner, which consists of the road wheel. Again, early pattern T54, T55, open spoke road wheel, much along the lines of the T34-85 and also the T44, because you know the T54 program basically evolved from the missing link known as the T44. Regardless, the road wheel moldings are excellent. I absolutely love the detailing found on these parts over here, and these will definitely paint very well and will hold the panel line accent even better. So that's something to look forward to. And clearly you have a ton of parts over here in order to assemble one model. So you're going to have, you better empty out your spare, or I should say your spent runner bin, because it's going to fill up pretty quickly with this build. And this leads us to the asterisks of the entire build. So during the whole time, I've been gushing over this model. Like I said before, this vehicle type was one that I never knew existed, and the quality on this model is exquisite, gorgeous. Everything is great moldings. Miniart really knows how to make a nice kit. And then we get to the tracks. And in typical modern kit fashion, they're about to score a home run, and while they're rounding third, they snap their ankle halfway between third and home plate by giving you individual link and length tracks. Yes, this kit, sadly, is plagued with individual link and length tracks. And as we know, these tracks are complete cancer on the armor modeling scene, and don't care, I'm not using them on this model. I'm not even going to give them the dignity of showing them on screen. Instead, I'm going to replace them with a set of workables. For this particular build, I'm going to be utilizing a set of workable track links from Trumpeter. One thing that I do want to add that's kind of funny is that Miniart themselves do produce a set of workable track links for the T55 pattern of vehicle. Unfortunately, they are the second generation of tracks, which are the same type of ones that you'll see on the T72. This vehicle here being an early pattern Soviet tank destroyer that's based on the T-54, or I should say the early pattern specifically of the T-54, the T-72 track links are just not going to work for this build, so a different source was going to be necessary. For T-55 workable track links, there are several options out there on the market, ranging from materials to cost. For this particular example here, like I stated, I'm going to be rolling with the Trumpeter option because this is probably the most cost-effective set that I was able to find on the market. As for the actual production of these links themselves, I'm going to have a video where I go over just a review on these track links, and I'm going to do a tutorial on how to assemble them, paint them, and install them on the build. This is going to be a video that's going to be posted shortly after this video here drops, so within a day or two, the video just dedicated to these track links here will be posted. However, I can say that the Trumpeter workable track links have been on the market now for a long time. In fact, it was even before Trumpeter even started making workable track links themselves. They had a separate company called Armor Track Models where they produced workable track links in 135. That was back in about 2004, 2005 or so. Fast forward to 2008, they decided to brand their own set of workable track links for a number of different vehicles. I actually did a set a little while ago for an early pattern of M1 Abrams, and yet that video can be found on the ECA channel. For this set here, one other thing I do want to mention is that there are two types of tracks that are offered by Trumpeter for the T55. And they're both sold as aftermarket sets, and both look identical to one another, and you can easily make the mistake and buy the wrong one, as I did. So this set here, again, was procured off of eBay, and they retail anywhere between 12 to about 20 some odd US dollars. So for workable track links, that's actually fairly affordable. However, Trumpeter makes a workable set like this one, but they also sell an individual static link and link set for the same price, has the exact same box art, the same type of box, same everything, only it's non-workable. I foolishly accidentally bought one of those, Came in, instantly realized, oh crap, I screwed up. Fortunately, I was able to send it back and get my money back. But keep this in mind if you are looking for workable track links, be sure you're getting this set here. As for the set in question, it's TK05, and it says right there in big giant letters, workable. Keep this in mind. This is the one you want. You don't want the other one. The other one's for the birds. This is the one that you want. So opening up the box, just like with the M1 set from a while ago, it has an outer sleeve to it. And when you open up the packaging itself, it's a subdivided box, just like the M1. And here you can see the components that are on the inside. So here we have the track links, which are molded in this brown material. And again, the other thing to point out, the static ones are molded in the exact same stuff. But these ones here are the functional ones. I'm not going to go ahead and get on video with the actual track links themselves. You will see that in the second video, as well as also when this model is fully completed, you'll see exactly what they look like in its final form. But here you can see the track links. They are molded in this brown type plastic. And in the other slot over here, we have the little pins that are used to get everything assembled and with their workable hinge. We'll see how this pans out, again, as the build progresses. But needless to say, I am definitely not regretting the choice of going with a workable track option for this particular build. And if Miniart's watching this and they got the opportunity to, please go ahead, upgrade your kits with workable track links like you've been doing with the other vehicles that are in your lineup. Back to the actual kit, this brings us to this little envelope that we have here that's very nicely packaged, I will add. And if I didn't know any better, I'd say this is probably the photo etch that is supplied with this kit, and it appears I am correct. So here you can see the PE. It is protected with this type of plastic film, and this is something I have seen before on some trumpeter kits. As for the quality of the PE, well, it looks awesome. Here we have the meshwork for the main engine grills. This is an excellent bit of detailing that is supplied with the model. Generally, these are the type of things that you need to acquire as an aftermarket source. Not so much with the Miniart, it comes with its stock. In addition to that, we have a plethora of other small little straps and doodads and other things that are going to be driving me nuts when I actually start the build. So yeah, this is definitely going to be a set that I am going to be eagerly awaiting to snip parts off of. And to make my life even more difficult for editing this video, here we have the instruction sheet. The instruction sheet, or I should say booklet for this thing, note how thick it is very nicely done with the graphic design, I might add. You can see the illustrations right over here. Opening it up, they start with a beautiful full color illustration of the different options that are available to mark this model. And then when you get past all the eye candy, it takes us to the kit supply, or I should say the kit part breakdown, which is, you know, generally what you see on a lot of plastic kits from Tamiya to Dragon. Only with Dragon they have those giant censored things on there telling you what you're not going to use. And this takes to the actual kit itself. And wow, okay, you can see that the model does have a working suspension with actual torsion bars, which explains why the torsion bar swing arm sections are in 2 halves, and also begs to ask the question, why the hell would they go with a static link track then? I'm not here to ponder any philosophy. That's plenty of time to do that later on in the video, but as you can see, the model is very, very detailed, which means there's a lot of little parts. This is the type of model you do have to pay attention to. There's a lot of things in here that you can easily overlook, like for instance, not drilling out certain holes where they need to be, forgetting to glue on a certain part here or there. With a model this type of complex, there's 7 different ways from Sunday to screw it up. So you have to stay on the ball, you have to pay attention. Much along the lines as you need to do on some more modern Dragon super kits. So this actually does classify, by the way, as a super kit. And this is the type of quality that I usually reference when I mention these videos, something which is a super kit. So yeah, this is definitely something that's going to be a very interesting build. And yeah, I'm going to be taking my sweet time on this one. On the back portion here, we have the CAD drawings, which, by the way, I absolutely love the way they do this. And this is something that they post on their website catalog, and it just makes the model look that much better. Even though it's all CAD, doesn't matter, it still looks good. I would love to have it in my collection, and I do. This, by the way, is what a year of builds looks like at ECA. And these are nothing but depleted runners. All of the spare parts that are on the various builds get stored in a large bin and kept in the shop for a later date. So yeah, I built a lot of models. Everything from Aurora to Revell you'll find in here. Oh well, time to make some space. And after some time later, since the previous scene, here we have the model now fully ready for painting. And I might as well go over some things at this point here before the model progresses past this point, because there are some things I want to mention specifically before the model does get painted. So some of the things I do want to touch upon at this time are with the photo etch. And this model is littered in PE. And now that the model is built and is ready for painting, you really get to appreciate that PE in its final format. So the PE is basically everything that's on the fret here you need to use, right? So the only things that are not secured on the model yet at this time are the mesh covers. As I generally mention in my videos, those are something that I add at the very end of the build. Because of the way PE is, these are the type of things that tend to want to get clogged up with layers of paint. So you do have to utilize some specific painting techniques in order to go ahead and get these painted and get them painted away where it doesn't clog up the meshwork. And this is something that's always done best when it's not installed onto the model. So this is going to be added after everything is painted. The other thing on the PE I do want to mention are some track straps right here. These are going to be added as the build progresses. These two straps here are for the log that's going to be added. And then we do have some straps that are right over here. These are not going to be affixed to the model. That's to secure a tarpaulin in place. It's an optional piece and I'm not going to secure it on the model. So these are just going to go into the spare bin. But regardless, you have to pay attention to this because everything on here is going to be utilized, and some of the parts are easier than others to free and bend, and it's not uncommon for something that's very small and frail to fling off the lost party, and that's going to be basically the story or the cautionary tale on the remainder of the build. But that is something I do want to touch upon at this time. You can also see some of the metalwork that I also went ahead and scratch built on this model, namely the hinge sections over here on the rear shutters, as well as also on the handles. These were originally supplied with the kit and are in plastic, and the pieces are very finely molded. On the handles, I was able to actually get all three of them installed, and on the last one, the piece buckled on me during removal off the sprue, and so since that one had to be replaced, I might as well have to throw the baby out with the bathwater and replace all of them just to keep continuity. It's just some wire over here. I just drilled the sections out where the pieces would have been. Well, actually, the pieces do need to be drilled out in order for you to plug the pieces in place. So I just simply widened the hole slightly with a pin vise and used wire instead. Same story over here with the little hinge or the lever for the shutters. These are kit supplied. They are so frailly molded. I mean, you could just like blow on it and the piece is going to fall apart. So when one of them just did not work out, I again didn't even try to salvage the other one. I just replaced both of them with wire. Fortunately, replacing them with wire is fairly easily done. I just used the plastic one as basically a rough guide, and I would have a very small pair of pliers was able to bend the wire to the exact same shape, and then the units were fitted in place as much along the same lines as the other ones. Which, of course, we will be circling back to that after everything is painted, so you get to appreciate it, everything with its final format. The fuel tanks over here, whoa, I actually got very lucky with them. Not a single thing broke on them, no catastrophes whatsoever. I just followed the instructions and everything panned out accordingly. But again, you have to pace yourself, you have to be very careful and very methodical with your movements. One thing that I do want to recommend at this time though, is with the way the pieces are connected, we do have this little rod that goes. Actually, there are these two pieces of PE that get glued to the plastic, and then there's this plastic rod, or I believe it's supplied with the kit's plastic, that gets inserted in this section over here, and this is the pin that holds the two straps in place for the fuel cans. I hope you're all keeping along. The PE was installed on the model perfectly, miraculously, because the pieces are very, very tiny. Again, you have to pay attention, be on your A game with that. Once everything is thoroughly dried, it was then time to install the straps. And the straps were bent to the appropriate shape, and the PE does bend very, very well. It's nice and thin, and it does hold the shape extremely well. Once you apply the right amount of glue in the right locations, it holds it very sturdy. The one thing, though, I do want to mention, I didn't even try to use the kit supplied rod for this section over here. It's far too thin, far too frail, specifically since it's going to be on tension here with the straps in its mounted format. So rather than going through using the plastic one, I simply just omitted it all together and replaced it with some metal wire. This is the same metal floor wire that I use for my antennas, and basically I just use that in place of the plastic rod, and because of that, the piece is now much stronger, and it didn't give me any sort of problems when it came time for mounting on the straps and making sure everything had the correct tension to it. And once they are done, yeah, they just look exquisite. These are the type of details where it's almost impossible to do without photo etch, and this kit here, it just nails it. It is just so... It's a very high quality kit. Even how these things are secured in place, you have these little metal hooks that are found in the back section over there, and the hooks are actually what's holding everything together. Again, the amount of engineering on this is staggering. It really is an impressive model. It's a bit overwhelming. I can't imagine, you know, some of the other Miniart kits, specific ones with full interiors. I think I'm going to stay clear away from those for the time being. But no, these Miniart kits are pretty dope so far. The other thing at this time, you can see that one little piece here flung off Paul's Partia, so I had to fabricate it out of styrene. No biggie. The headlights look awesome. I love that little strap that's on them. I thought the strap was actually going to be much harder to form and bend to shape compared to how it actually was. It just worked out, you know, perfectly, which is something that I was anticipating to give me a little bit of resistance with, but, you know, as you can see, I just persevered ahead. It went on absolutely flawlessly. So, again, kudos to the kit. The other thing you'll see at this time is that right now the tank is about to head off into primer, and the mantlet over here, you know, is all fully assembled. At this time, you can see that these sections here have not only been primed, but I also went ahead and brushed on some colors that I use as the base coat for this, and this is just done just to prevent any sort of missed paint areas. As you can see, the design on this one's much along the lines like you see on other casemates like a Yag Panther or a Yag Tiger, and you're going to have the same type of situation where if you build it and not pre-prime or paint anything, when you move the unit along, you will have bare exposed areas of plastic, and it's one of those type of things that's almost impossible to get in there with paint once it's fully assembled. So pre-paint, pre-prime, then install. And if you do that, you shouldn't have any sort of problems. Also, on the unit itself, I had to use some white glue in order to just stiffen things up a little bit. It's a little bit on the looser end right now since I've been, you know, playing with it during construction, but this was something that was definitely needed. Without the white glue in place in the pivot sections, the thing is just going to droop on you immensely. So I do recommend, if you're building one of these, definitely hit it with the white glue early on. Currently on the model, the one thing you do not see yet are the clear plastic components. These are going to be added, well, after everything is painted, for a reason that should be fairly obvious. The other reason, or I should say some of the other parts that are clear that are fitted at this time, are the periscopes found right here on the bow, as also on these sections here on the top. You'll notice that they have been thoroughly masked up at this time, clearly to prevent them from getting oversprayed. On these ones here, in their little protective housings, I actually pre-primed and pre-painted, much along the lines as I did over here with the mantlet, the areas with some little bit of flat black Tamiya, as well as also with the base coat I'm using. Then I topped them off with the covers. The undercovers had the same procedure done to them as well. And then just some masking tape was fitted over the front areas, again, to thoroughly protect them. The only periscopes that are not fitted at this time are the ones here on this rotating cupola. It's not even glued on yet. Because of the design of this, the periscopes get glued in from underneath, so I can go ahead and thoroughly paint this thing and then install the periscopes at the tail end of the build, and then finally just put it onto its appropriate location and call it a day. I'm not sure if I'm going to go ahead and glue this on yet at this time, or I'm talking, you know, once it's finished, I mean, because I kind of like the fact that it can pivot on you, and it gives the model a little bit more interest in that regard. But this is something that I'm on the fence with. We'll see as the build progresses. By the time I get to this point, I'll probably be so exhausted with this build, I'm probably just going to glue it on permanently. So we'll see how that pans out. We have some more PE in the back. One of the PE straps flung off the Lost Partia, so I just fabricated a new one out of thin aluminum. Fortunately, it's so small that's easily done. The suspension. This model did have a working suspension, And I was able, by and large, to get it to work. I did glue permanently some of the suspension sections in place just to prevent the thing from sagging. This is a technique that I've done on some 1/6 scale models. And also, I think if I was to build this one a second time around, I could probably go ahead and actually make the suspension work a little bit better compared to on this example over here. But, you know, that information will be discussed on another Miniart build. I do have 2 more of these Miniart T55 kits in my stash, so, you know, we'll see how those, we'll see what happens when I get to those. But again, everything is just so incredibly detailed. It's just, it really is very impressive. The option, I should say, the kit does have an option to go either with a working suspension or with a static suspension. So if you just want to avoid that altogether, you can simply just roll with that option as well. But as you can see, some of them... So I actually, these ones, oddly enough, returned to workable status. When I was going through the model, or the motion to build, I'm like, you know what? Maybe the working suspension is going to work on this. So I went and glued everything in place with some super glue. But as it turns out, it actually stiffened up the suspension even more. And on some of the units, you can see they fully work. So... yeah, and even the things are articulated, which is incredible. One's on the opposite side, less so, I guess, if I fill with it. But you know what? I'm going to leave the working suspension up for my next T55 from Miniart. But regardless, you know, this is an interesting toe in the water. The other thing to mention at this time is just the anti-aircraft MG. I went ahead and thoroughly assembled it. Usually when it comes to armament like this, I like to leave the unit off of the carriage. Just makes painting and weathering all that much easier. However, with something like this, it is so complex and so cluttered with different sorts of details that it's easier to go ahead and paint everything in one go and then go ahead and carefully paint the unit separately, or I should say paint the unit carefully with a paintbrush and weather accordingly. So this is something that we're going to see a little bit of a different of my usual norm, and we'll see how that pans out as the build continues. But it is gorgeous. The piece I made fully functional, where it can elevate in the press. If you follow the kit, you're not going to be able to do that. In order to make the piece function, you do have to snip some small little piece of plastic here and there, and then that will make the unit fully function. There's also a wire on this side over here. It's like a cable of some sort. The kit one is formed to a fixed shape. However, it cracked during construction. I'm going to have to replace that with a real piece of silicone wire, but you'll see what this looks like after everything is painted. Just like with everything else, this thing is littered in not just a bunch of small little detail components, but also lots of photo etch. So there's a bunch. If you don't like PE, this is definitely not going to be the kit for you. Even the ammo cans have PE on them in certain locations, and again, everything is just exquisitely rendered. This one, not so much. There was a little bit of a seam to remove, but, you know, that's normal for a two-piece assembly. Another thing that's a bit of a depart from my typical builds is usually the tools on my models. I like to paint them separately off the model, then add them after everything is painted. However, for this one here, that's not going to be an option because of the tool clamps being made out of photo etch. Just like what I mentioned on the old school Tamiya 8-wheeled armor car video, when you have something like this, it's best to install the tools on all together and then paint the model as one unit, then carefully go ahead and paint and weather everything's, once everything's fitted in place. Again, it's a bit of a departure from my norm, but after doing it on a couple builds, I do have my confidence up. I should be able to go ahead and, have the same results with this one here. But this, again, is done because of the PE, and the PE goes into the appropriate locations. And again, it just leaves for some excellent detailing once everything is fully painted. It leaves for a little bit more work compared to if the parts were molded on, but again, that comes with the territory. The very last thing I want to mention is with the fit on this section over here, where the two final drives make contact with the rear plate, there was some seam work in these areas over here, and fortunately, in order to take care of that, I simply just used my red putty trick, where I taped the area off, I put a smear of red putty in place, and then I add little notches with a small screwdriver, or not screwdriver, I used a X-Acto knife. And this, by the way, technique is referenced on a 1/16 scale Sherman video. I'll go ahead and throw the direct link to that, so if anyone's curious how I achieve that, you can see that. And then once the tape is pulled off, at least for the effect that we have here, this does twofold. First, it removes the seam that would be present in this location, and it also gives you the much needed weld bead detailing, which would be present on the real unit. So, it's a 2-for-1. Once everything is painted and weathered, this is undoubtedly really going to shine and look very, very nice in its final form. And while on the bottom, screw it, might as well point out the tin work, or I should say the straps found here on the bottom of the tin work. excellent bit of detailing. In fact, this is the first time I've done a T55 family of vehicle in 135 that had these details in place. All the other ones, it's, you know, you usually don't have these details there because it's not really that visible. Miniart, nope, they got the fittings there, and it goes to show you just how thorough this kit really is. It really is a very impressive model kit. Starting with the model's running gear, the components that you see here outside of the track are all stock with the kit and were assembled out of box. As I mentioned before, the kit originally was designed to have an option between a static suspension or a functional suspension. And I was able to get some of these torsion bars to work. However, as I mentioned before, they are fiddly to the 10th degree. In order to really have made them retain their functionality, this is going to take a little bit more hand fitting on some of the parts just to open up some of the tolerances, which will allow the suspension to better articulate. Which again transfers over to what I stated before, where it's kind of interesting that they gave you that feature, because with the static individual link and link tracks, it literally negates all of that. So it's kind of a strange feature that it has. Regardless, this feature will definitely be more appreciated if you switch out the stock tracks with workable links, because you will have a brain stamp because those tracks are just awful. Regardless, the wheels are also designed or with the ability to be made functional as well. On this one here, that's not the case, and I was just able to get them installed in a permanent manner, but in order to get them to fully rotate, this is something that can be possible, but again, you are really going to have to play around with removing the tolerances, and you're going to have to fiddle with it. Is it something that's doable? Yes, but you are going to have to work a little bit extra in order to achieve that effect. If it's worth it or not, that's really up to the discretion of the builder. Me, for my usage of this model here, I just went with the static approach, so the way you see it is basically what you get. However, the suspension does assemble very well, and the quality on the components, as you can see, are excellent. The one thing you want to pay attention to is that on the T54 and T55 pattern of vehicles, there are bump stops found in each of the swing arms, and they are like a little rubber cap section, and on this vehicle here, I did paint it prior to the installation of the road wheels. This is something that, again, it's more appreciated without the suspension in place, but it's one of those things where if you know, it really helps to actually go forth and do it. On the sprocket over here, you can see that I went ahead and painted the little Zerk fitting with the red color. This is a feature that I've seen on lots of T55 and T54 variants. So in this one here, a little swipe of red paint plus a little bit of gloss lacquer added afterwards is just used to give you that nice rounded off effect. This is, again, something I always mention in these videos. A lot of models have these type of features already integrally molded in. It just requires the builder to just go ahead and paint it. It's one of those things where if you know, you just add a little paint here or there, and it definitely makes the model look so much more polished and improved compared to just leaving everything overpainted. Also in this example, you can see that I went ahead and rendered it with the early pattern of front idler wheel, because why not? This is an early pattern vehicle after all. And the quality on these parts are exquisite. You can see it has little mud slit holes right there on the stock part. And again, the need to replace this with an aftermarket is completely moot. On the inner portion over here, hopefully this comes out on frame, but I went ahead and painted the rim with some silver paint, because on the real unit this is actually obviously not rubber rimmed, it would be steel rimmed, and as one would imagine, the paint would not last on this section very long. So if you're building a model like this, be sure to go ahead and add a little bit of steel paint to that section. Just it makes the model look, again, all that much more fully fleshed out. Same of course is true for all of the T55, T54 variants. Not to forget as well the T62, T72, and T90. Basically, the Russians have kept this format all the way since the World War II time frame. Moving back to the final drive section, as I mentioned before, there was a little bit of a gap found in these two locations just with the way the hull went together. So this was plugged up with a little bit of red putty that was strategically turned into a weld bead. And now that the model's fully painted and weathered, you really get to see how that weld bead detailing just enhanced the model compared to just leaving that absent. Also on this location over here, you get to see the log that is strapped to the back of the vehicle. In case anyone is unaware, the purpose of the log is so that if the tank gets stuck, you can actually chain this to the tracks, and this will help you claw yourself out of a ditch or a muddy type condition when the tracks are just not giving you any traction. As for the piece itself, it's adequately detailed. I just went ahead and painted and weathered it in the following format, then secured it in place. This is something that I added at the very tail end of the build, because obviously this is painted very differently compared to the remaining sections that are found on the vehicle, and something this large, it's going to be very tricky to go ahead and thoroughly paint outside of the rest of the paintwork, specifically once it's fitted in place. Also on this location over here, you get to see the rear fuel canisters. And again, all of those excellent photo etch details are really popping out. And the piece just looks absolutely amazing. Quickly steering back down to the tracks, as I mentioned before, it would have been a cold day in hell before you would see me use the individual link links that came with this kit. So they were swapped out with a pair of workable plastic links from Trumpeter. The Trumpeter links work absolutely perfectly with this model over here. And as you can see, not only do they fit the suspension extremely well, but most importantly, they time almost perfectly with the Miniart sprocket. These tracks paint very well. The only downside to them is that they are a bit fiddly and fragile, specifically once they are fully assembled. This is something that I am going to go over in more depth in the TrackLink tutorial video that's going to be posted shortly after this one here. However, if you are successful in assembling the tracks and getting them fitted to the vehicle, they definitely are so much more enhanced and really give the model so much more life compared to trying to attempt to roll with the stock kit offerings. The one thing about these tracks, though, that I do want to mention, and this is true for all of the T55 and T54 family, is with the thread pattern itself. The thread pattern to the casual observer may look like you could install it in any which way. However, there is a direction to them. If you look at the front portion right over here, you will see that the cleat actually has this little chevron going where it goes straight, it goes up, and then it bends down and goes straight again. This is in complete opposite compared to generally what you see on American vehicles, where the chevrons are generally pointing down. This is important to mention because if you're building a T54 or a T55, not to mention a T62, this is the track thread pattern that you want with the direction. And yes, if you have it on in reverse, people will notice and it will just ruin your day, and that's not something you want to have happen to you, specifically if you're rolling with a track that's permanently fixed in place, like on the Tamiya kits with the single-piece vinyls. On this one over here, again, you want to be aware of that. So just for reference, this here is what would look like from the vehicle on the front. And this is what would look like on the vehicle from the rear. Once you have that figured out and factored in, the tracks are not going to be an issue. Also, needless to say, because these tracks worked on this vehicle here, the Trumpeter tracks are more than suffice for being added to any of the T54 and T55 kits in the Miniart lineup, which there are quite a few. Moving up brings us to the front plate detailing, and everything you see here is stock, and the parts are as finely molded and as finely detailed as they can possibly be. So starting with the spare track links, these I believe are the Trumpeter ones. I didn't even use the kit ones for the spares, and they were dropped in place much along the lines as the original ones would have followed. The kit supply photo etch was applied into the appropriate locations, giving you for the final look that you see here. Also, the detailing is so pronounced where we have the little clasps that lock the reverse sections of the hooks in place. But in addition to that, hopefully you can get this on camera because with this barrel in the way kind of obstructs the view, you get all of the fender locking spring details present with this kit as well. This includes the actual spring itself, but also all of the little provisions, some of which are made out of photo etch, and yes, they are extremely tiny and are at times very difficult to go ahead and remove off the sprue and fit in place. In fact, I may have lost one or two during the assembly of the build. Fortunately, I was able to replicate them on some very thin scrap pieces of aluminum or some scrap pieces of PE fret. But regardless, you do want to stay on the ball with that, and that's, like I said before, a hallmark found on this kit. Which, again, in a way, it's a good thing. So on this fender over here, you get to see what it looks like on the reverse side. And hopefully you get to see what it looks like on the opposite side as well. Another bit of detailing that you can see right here is the transport light, or the, I guess it would be like a convoy light or something along those lines. And this is a bit of detailing found on many other Russian vehicles, specifically from the post-World War II time frame. But on this vehicle here, they're in a slightly different format compared to what we see on other vehicles. So generally on a vehicle like a T54 or T62, these lights are present, but they are just mounted right on the fender itself or possibly on the side of the hull. And they're generally in a cluster where you get two of them, one pointing forward and the other one pointing to the side. Same is also true for the rear. However, on this pattern of vehicle, it's unique in that the lights are on these extenders that you can see, and it's a very distinctive bit of detailing that just gives so much extra character to the build. On the real unit, they had the foresight of knowing that these things are going to snag and possibly break really easily, so they are actually mounted on a spring, much along the lines as you see a lot of antennas or other type of appendages like this found on cars. It's a really cool bit of detailing. In 1/35 scale, obviously the spring is molded in and it's not real, and because of that, the fragility on this piece is through the freaking roof. This is another one of those parts you really want to stay on the ball because something long and skinny like that just beckons to be broken, either during the sprue extraction or possibly just from handling the model. Another thing to mention is that you'll see that on this side here, it's not symmetrical in size. This one's shorter than this one, and this is, again, as per the vehicle. On these components over here, these were literally probably the very last thing that I fitted in place. Because of the fragility of them, like I mentioned before, these things are just asking to be broken, specifically when I place the vehicle on its side, when I'm installing the tracks, or when I'm doing the weathering with the dry brushing method. It's best left at the very tail end. Once the things are glued in place, this is at the point when you really don't want to touch this model anymore. As for the paintwork, like I've mentioned on a few other of these Russian tank videos, the lamp section is actually gloss white, as you can see right there. It kind of looks like the incident light meter that you see for photography, if anyone knows what that is. It's very similar along those lines. These details are integrally molded in. Again, just simply paint them and paint them accordingly. On this one here, it's a little swipe of white paint with a little swipe then of, to me, a clear lacquer, just to give it that nice little sheen, to indicate again that it's a nice, clear, or it's not clear, but a glossy lens type fitting. The same is also true for the rear portion of the vehicle, and you can see them right here. There's one, and there's the other, and these are just in your conventional location as you would find on a standard T54 or T55. Temporarily jumping back to these things, not only do we have the detailing of the light itself, but you can also see the conduit that emerges from this rear section over here, and it runs along a very unique pattern where it leaves the light, runs along the finding compartment, enters up through the armor section right here, and goes right there into the side. A similar feature is found on the reverse side. Just clear the tube, and you can see what it looks like on the reverse side of the model. Not only are these pieces perfectly designed with their geometry, but they even have the weld beads integrally molded on, and the weld beads are in spot sections just like the real vehicle. Again, very, very, very impressive detailing found on this kit. It does make the extraction and cleanup of these parts very, very, very tricky, but if you could pull it off, it's definitely a beautiful piece once fit in place and once fully weathered. While on the lights, this brings us to the main headlamps themselves, and I mentioned before these are a multi-part assembly, and by multi-part I mean a very complex multi-part at that, made out of all the materials under the sun, from standard opaque plastic to clear plastic to photo etch. And here's what they look like fully painted and weathered. As I mentioned before, I was actually expecting these to be harder to assemble than they actually were, so that's a plus on the kit. And now that the unit's fully painted and completed, you get to see what it looks like with the clear plastic lens fitted in place. Like I mentioned before, there is an internal bulb detailing. This was painted with some silver paint, and then the clear lens was added on top. The lens does have the lens retainer ring integrally molded on, so you have to carefully paint that as that would be the color of the tank. This was very carefully painted with a fine paintbrush, and then once it was ready for installation, it was glued in place. For the glues on all of the clear plastic parts, I went with Elmer's white glue because for the mentions I stated in other videos, this dries basically translucent, so it's not going to pop up in case there's any sort of extra residue. It's easy to clean in case there is extra residue, and on top of that, in case there's a mishap, you can easily pop the piece off and clean it off without any permanent effects to the plastic. On top of that, unlike super glue where it dries with that annoying white gas type substance, for white glue over here, obviously that's not a thing. So for gluing on lenses, it's always, in my opinion, some of the best medium out there. A lot of plain guys will tell you that there's a lot of other glues out there that will do the same job, and I'm not discounting that at all. In fact, I would love to know some other options out there, because the one problem with the white glue is that although it does all of those positive attributes, it is on the weaker side. So if this is something that needs to be operable or something that's in a high hit location, chances are it's going to pop off long before something else that has a better bond. But again, in my opinion, it does have lots of benefits, which is why I use it. And on top of that, the stuff is hella cheap, so that's another thing to factor in. But once completed, you really get to appreciate the look that you see here. In addition to the main headlamp, you can see another one of those transport lights right there alongside. And yes, this too also has a little bit of conduit detailing that I mentioned before for the other sections. And also, like the other parts, you can see I painted it with the gloss white. Moving sideward takes us to some of the other details, which would include these ribbed for her pleasure boxes right here on the side. These were a very intricate piece of detailing to make, and again, you guess it's a multi-part assembly. This is in quite contrast if you get something from Trumpeter or Tamiya even, where it's basically complete, you just have to glue the two end sections on. This one here, nah, you gotta glue a few more sections together. This does give you nice detailing. As you can see, it has all of the appropriate stamped embossed detailing present. However, the side effect is, again, alignment. This is one of those pieces where you want to carefully glue them in place. Make sure everything is at the appropriate location and it doesn't shift on you as the glue sets, because if it does, guess what? It's not going to be able to fit onto the hull itself. You have two patterns of boxes, the long one and the short one, and it is a mirror image on the reverse side, as you can see right here. Also, on the tin work sections, again, if it could be a separate piece, it is on this kit. Every little bit of detailing is something that needs to be glued on separately, and this would include all these very nicely designed little support sections that we have here. These braces are something that glue on very well. However, when you're fitting the boxes on, I found that the alignment and the locations are a bit on the snug side, so much so that when you're assembling these, it's probably best to install the boxes in place first and then drop in the little supports just to make sure that everything fits where it needs to go. Otherwise, you run the risk of installing these sections in place, then when it comes time to install the boxes, the parts are a little too close for comfort. Moving rearward takes us to one of the more unique aspects on this vehicle, and that is the detailing found on the external fuel tanks. This is very different in contrast to your standard garden variety T54 or T55. If I'm not mistaken, I believe some of the very early examples of the T54 have examples like this, but this is something a little hazy on. If you do, of course, know in the comment section below. Regardless, from what I've seen on real examples and also from the ones I've built in the past, they have a flat pan style of external fuel tank. Back to this one here, these of course are very excellently detailed, and if it has the embossed stamping on the real one, it's going to be on this one here. And yes, just like these boxes, multi-part assembly, you definitely want to take your time with. One interesting bit of detailing on this example is that, unlike the other kits on the market where the plumbing is something that you have to add yourself and it's not supplied with the kit, on this one here, the plumbing is actually kit supplied, and again, it's as frail as you can possibly imagine. The detailing is absolutely excellent, and on the plumbing on these vehicles, you do have some rubber fittings that connect the tubes in place, and this is something that you have to paint in order to really make the model pop. A little swipe of black paint there, possibly a little drop of gloss for that little sweaty effect, and you're good to go. On the top portions here, you can see this sweaty look that I've done to the filler caps, again, which would be customarily seen on a vehicle like this. Continuing topside, you get to see more of the PE, like the tow cable clamp right over here, as well as also the tools and their tool clamps. As I mentioned before, the tool posts on this vehicle are all photo etch, and you do have to stay on the ball and you have to carefully bend them to shape. As I mentioned before, this is something that I actually installed onto the tank before I painted it, so all of the tools that you see on this model here were carefully and meticulously painted after the model went through its paint and the weathering, which came out absolutely perfect on this build here. This is one of those type of procedures where you want to have your painting all ironed out. You need to use a very good paintbrush, and you have to have the paint, most importantly, at the proper consistency. Too runny, and it goes all over the place. Too thick, and it's going to be too chunky. Yeah, you want to have that nice sweet spot of the paint. And once you have that and you paint the parts appropriately, the model will look absolutely perfect. On this side here, you get to, again, appreciate those fuel straps I mentioned before on those small little dimpy little fuel cans. And you also get to see the PE grill work that I was referencing before. One thing that's also interesting is that this hinge underneath here actually can work with the way the PE is designed. If you play your cards right, the peach can actually flip up and down. The problem is once it gets this PE grill in place, it kind of keeps it in the static format. So it's a nice bit of detailing, and oddly enough, it's probably easier to make it work than not, but once you put the PE grills in place, that's the end of it. Also, like I mentioned before, the PE grills are the very last thing that gets fitted to this vehicle. Actually, they get fitted before these little the antenna things that I mentioned before, but once they are fit in place, they really do seal the deal very nicely. And as I mentioned before, painting PE grill work is an art form in itself. You need to have your painting ducks in a row for that too, because if you have the paint either not properly mixed, or even too close with the airbrush, or even too far with the airbrush, it's not going to work very well, and you're just going to clog up these sections, and that always hurts the look of a build. If you play your cards correctly and you know how to navigate those waters, you should be able to get everything primed, painted, weathered, and fitted in place without any sort of collateral damage done to the actual grill itself. Also on the rear section here, you get to see the oil canister, and I believe, from what I understand, this is actually used to hold oil, not fuel, but you get to see what it looks like with the weathering added. And you also get that really iconic side exhaust manifold right there. Again, the kit has this piece very nicely rendered with the way the kit is designed. For the weathering, I went in my usual format with the use of a rusting agent along with some airbrushing in order to give you the look that you see here. The top engine deck here, we got the engine hatches. We got this nice little box that gets in the way of opening the engine hatch. That's probably something that you have to remove just to get access to the engine compartment. But you also have all of those really cool straps I was mentioning before, and it's just cluttered with detail back here, and this kit, again, does a very good job with this. Continuing to this side brings us to the grab handles. Like I mentioned before, these were all fabricated out of metal because I broke one of the plastic ones. And with the model complete, you get to see what I was referring to with the use of continuity. If you break one, you might as well just swap out all four. Otherwise, one of them will just look a bit different compared to the other versions, even if the wire and the plastic are the same diameter. It's one of those things where it just sticks out. So one goes, just replace all four, and then when you're done with it, you can see that everything blends in much better. Also in this location over here, you get to see the saw that has been added in place. Again, kit supply part, nicely detailed. The only thing you might want to pay attention to are that the handles are made out of wood on these Soviet saws, and once everything is painted and weathered, it looks great. Also in this section over here, you get to see the shovel right there. And again, everything was painted on the model once the paintwork was all concluded. Moving our way to the mandolin, this is my favorite part of this vehicle. I just love the way the side angles over here just narrow in. You have this real cool bug looking like mandolin on the front. And this, again, is all stock with the stock details. On this model here, I added the clear lens section at the very tail end of the build for a reason that should be fairly obvious. And I went ahead and had to carefully paint the rim of the lens just to protect the inner section. And again, it needs to blend in with the remainder of the vehicle. The unit itself has its MG fitted in place. Excellent bit of detailing. I just painted and weathered it, and I also added a little bit of powder fouling right there on the end. Yes, everything is still functional, as you can see right here. But as I mentioned before, it is a bit on the looser end when you first build it, so a drop of Elmer's glue is something that's going to be very beneficial. But this is one of those things where even the Elmer's glue will hold it in place. However, if you continue to pivot and maneuver the piece, the glue will eventually wear out, and it's going to start drooping on you. So that's something to be aware of. And unlike some other vehicles where you can get easy access to go in there with some more glue, on a model like this here, that's not the case. So definitely bear that in mind. Continuing with the armament, you can see that the tube itself went on without any sort of problems. Because this is a single piece assembly, you're not going to have to worry about seam removal, which is one of the few things on this build that you don't have to worry about seam removal on. But the brake itself is a two-piece assembly, as I showcased before, and it goes together absolutely perfectly. Little swipes of sandpaper and some thick super glue later, and you're going to have the part looking like the way you see here. You have to be careful not to over sand in some sections, but if you're careful and you play your cards right, you should be able to achieve the look that you see on my build. Moving back to the fighting compartment, and as I mentioned before, the entire hull on this thing is just like the real one, where it's all in separate panels, and you have to carefully glue everything together, and not just glue them together, but make sure that they are in the correct angles. And on this vehicle over here, there's quite a few angles, and if one of them doesn't line up, it's going to throw off some others. So this is probably the biggest challenge on this model here, and it's why I say this is definitely not going to be something for a beginner. In addition to that, once all the panels are glued together, you will have some seams to contend with. Most of the seams line up in locations that are appropriate, so they just blend together very well. However, some others are going to require a little bit of a special touch, namely the ones right over here on the side of these angle sections. With the way the real vehicle is, it's like a German World War II tank where a puzzle fits together. However, on this model over here, the seam just goes from top to bottom, so you will have a seam cutting across these sections. And this is something that can make or break you on this build, so you want to be careful, and you want to carefully go ahead and polish down these sections with a little bit of glue and a little bit of very fine sandpaper. Some careful wet sanding was done in order to achieve the seamless effect that you have on this build. And again, this is something that you really need to stay on the ball with. Moving topside, again, all the details you see here are stock. And now that the model's fully painted, you can see what the periscopes look like with the masking tape sections removed. This is something that's done best with the masking tape method, because if you try to just go in there with some paint solvent to try to dislodge the paint, this is probably more likely going to cause other issues that you really want to avoid. So the masking tape is definitely the best option available. On the Commander's cupola, this here is actually able to pivot. So as I mentioned before, the piece is just friction fit on in place. And on the real unit, this thing can pivot in all sorts of different directions. And on this one here, I went ahead and replicated that. So the piece is just pressed on with friction. Luckily, after a few layers of paint and varnish, it stiffened things up, so it, basically stays in place where it needs to be. If I want to pop the piece off, you get to see the internal sections with those periscopes that I mentioned before, and these are, again, white glued in place for the same reasons that I mentioned earlier. With the unit off, you really get to appreciate the clear plastic periscope inserts, and again, it's fittings like this that just make the model just so much more enhanced, as opposed to something that would be opaque plastic that you just, use gloss black to go ahead and paint. Piece just drops directly in place, and once it finds its sweet spot, as you can see, it is on the snug side. The same was not done with the MG. This is permanently glued on in place because of the weight of the MG and the fragility of the MG. It was best done in this manner. As for the MG itself, this is such a nicely detailed part. It's insane, and that, of course, makes sense on account of how many sub-assemblies are on this freaking thing. So as I mentioned before, I basically built the entire unit, and I had to carefully paint everything separately. And here you get to see the final outcome of my labor. So everything was painted and weathered in the following format. Of course, the MG itself would be black, and then I weathered it accordingly with my dry brush method. The little carry handle right here is wood on the real unit, so I went ahead and replicated as such. It might also have been Bakelite depending on some of the examples, but regardless, it is a brownish color either way. On this side here, you get to see the real wire that I used for that detailing. This is unpainted, as the wire I use is black silicone in nature, so it fits the bill absolutely perfectly. The unit can also pivot up and down, as you can see. And this was a bit of functionality that I added to the piece, and it's not something that's there if you follow the kit out of the box. The other thing to mention is that the charging handle is actually built, of course, into the receiver, but the mount has a lever charging handle on it to give you a little bit more leverage to rack this thing. And this would be, of course, the color of the tank, and so, again, you want to factor that in accordingly. The kit does have a optic right there on the inside with some other very nice finely molded details, and this was another one of the final bits that were added to the model at the tail end of the build. The ammo cans are painted in a slightly different color green to give the color, or I should say, to give the model a little bit more character, and also this is basically how these cans would look in real life. One thing to mention about Soviet ammo cans is that they came in a multitude of different colors, so you do have some creative license available to you. The belt detailing is there, as well as the rounds, and for the rounds themselves, you can see I went ahead and painted them to replicate a brass, but of course steel case would be something that would be seen on these units in real life as well. The belts on these units here are non-disintegrating, and they are a black coloring, much along the lines you see it on an MG42 or an MG3. But of course, this is the same difference as it is on the DSHK, as well as the RPD. The very last thing I want to mention is the antenna itself. This is a piece of metal floor wire that was fitted in place, giving you for the look that you have here. I believe the kit gives you an option to use a plastic one that's applied with the kit, but as I mentioned before, the plastic ones are so finely molded that when you remove them off the sprue, good luck trying to really polish them down. And on top of that, I'm not a fan of plastic antennas because they just have the really bad habit on snapping from any sort of little thing that brushes against them. And once an antenna breaks, you're not fixing it. It's toast. So rather than deal with all that drama, I just went ahead and used a piece of thin floor wire, painted it black, and Bob's your uncle, the piece is ready to go. This is the exact same type of metal that I use on all of my tank antennas in this scale for reasons that are literally like the ones I just mentioned. And that's all there is for the details. This takes to the paint and the marking. So for the paintwork on this one here, what you see is the end result of a cocktail of a bunch of different colors that were just basically thrown at the wall to see what sticks. I really wanted to emulate as much as possible the kit from the box art, and I believe I came very, very close with achieving that end result. The model was, of course, first thoroughly primed with flat black spray paint. And then the original base coat was my US post-World War II olive drab. This is an exterior latex and it was applied via the airbrush. Then on top of that, it received several different shades of washes and filters from a multitude of different colors, from cream to a Mission Models medium green to, I believe, some other Tamiya color. It's a little hazy on it. It's been a little while since I built this one, but it's been a cocktail of a few different colors to get you the end result you see presently. On top of that, it then received the counter shading, which was done with the airbrush, and then the remainder of the weathering was done my usual format with the dry brush, leaving for the end result you see. The markings on this one here are absolutely excellent. This is, again, my first go-ahead at a Miniart kit, and if they all have decals that are this quality, you should definitely have absolutely no problems and build one of these things with pure confidence. The markings are the Kit Supply water slide decals. They went on without any sort of problems, and then once added to the model, the entire surface was sealed with the VMS matte varnish, giving you for the end result you see presently. The VMS went in, sealed everything in place, and it gives the vehicle this nice flat look that you see here, and it just looks absolutely exquisite. What's really impressive about the markings is that I was able to get them wrapped around these little embossed rounded sections, which, if anyone knows a thing or two about decals, that is generally one of the harder things to get decals around. But the Miniart decals are so good in quality, they were able to navigate and go around all these sections over here without any sort of issues, not to mention getting varnished in place. So again, the decals are definitely a high point on this kit. And at the end of the day, I couldn't be any happier in how this build turned out. This one here was a marathon run. This, by no stretch of the imagination, is a simple kit, and being able to get this model built and built to the condition that we have here is definitely a very rewarding experience. The whole build was enjoyable. It's just one that you are going to need to pump your brakes, take your time on, and it's definitely one that may push you to your limits if you don't have a certain skill sets that are going to be required in order to just build this thing out of the box. However, because of this really interesting subject matter, as well as the excellent quality that this kit does supply you with, it is definitely worth it in the long run, specifically when you're at the end of the project and you have a vehicle like this sitting in your collection. Which brings us to the perfect opportunity to go into skill level and recommendation. So straight out of the gate, if you're a beginner modeler and the type of person that either has never done a plastic model kit before or have built a few simple kits under their belt, then this is going to be absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, not going to be the kit for you. Do not walk, run in the opposite direction from this one here. Seriously, you have absolutely no business acquiring this kit, adding it to your collection. I cannot stress that enough. This is not a beginner-friendly model by any stretch of the imagination. This kit here was very, very, very complex, and you need to have all of your ducks in a row in order to put it together. Not just with basic plastic model kit building, but also with things like hand fitting and, most importantly, working with photo etch. This kit here is a next level super kit, and because of that, this is definitely not going to be someone, or I should say, it's not going to be a kit for somebody that either has never touched a model kit before, or you've built some of the older Tamiya kits that are in Hobby Lobby. If that's you, you might want to pump your brakes, because this is definitely going to be something that you need to level up to. And if you're watching this video and you have built a number of kits already in your stash, and you're really thinking to yourself, well, I'm not a beginner, I could probably tackle this kit, you might want to pump your brakes too, because if you're an intermediate level builder, this is still not going to be the kit for you. Absolutely not. I mean, granted, you definitely have a better shot compared to a beginner, but this is definitely not going to be something that you're going to enjoy building. This kit here is 100% a kit that I cannot recommend enough for an advanced builder. You're looking at it. This is not an intermediate friendly build at all. With the amount of hand fitting that needs to be done in order to get everything fitted in place, with the way the hull is designed where you have to basically puzzle panel everything together, make sure everything is jigged appropriately, make sure the alignment is right. This is definitely something that if you're used to building kits from Trumpeter or Dragon, you're going to be swimming in the deep end when you're tackling one of these models here, absolutely. And then when it comes to the photo etch, this is not something like you see on, again, those other kits where the PE consists of things like, you know, mesh covers or anything along those lines. When you have the little fiddly bits of PE that I showed earlier in this video, a beginner, or not beginner, definitely not, but an intermediate may have some difficulty with working with these. And if you are good with working with these, chances are you're not an intermediate anymore. At that point, I think you could safely call yourself an experienced builder. As for someone who has the experienced skill set, well then obviously this is going to be the kit for you. If you're one of those people that are bored with building kits from Tamiya or Trumpeter or Dragon, and you really want something that just oozes detail fidelity, but it's one that you can really stretch your legs out on, then that is the type of person who I recommend this kit to. Basically, if you're a modeling sadist or masochist, this is going to be the kit for you. This is not something that you're going to be able to like whip together in an afternoon or in a weekend. You're going to need to pump your brakes on this one. This is the one where you're going to have to, you know, assemble something. It's going to take about an hour or two just to assemble like something like the gas tank, for instance. And that's just one. And then, you know, multiply that for every other little sub-assembly on this build. Now, this is the type of build that we're talking about. So, I would recommend this kit for anyone who's just an avid fan of Soviet armor. And also, if you are just the type of person that likes to get a good bang from their buck, if you're the type of person that likes to buy a model and you spend some money on it, but you really want to pace yourself and you just want to have a build experience that is a prolonged one and not just one that you could just, you know, take care of in an afternoon, this is going to be the kit for you. As I mentioned earlier in the video, there is another option out there of this particular vehicle type that's on the market in plastic and is mostly readily available. That's the version from a Hobby Boss. However, I can't really say if that one's any easier compared to this one over here, as I've yet to build one of those examples. So, unfortunately, I can't have a good face-off on, you know, which one would be better for someone who's an intermediate level. That one potentially might be, but again, I can't really say for certain. I will say this for certain on this one, this is definitely an advanced model kit. No bones about it. Aside from what I mentioned before, where this vehicle is strongly recommended for anyone who's a Soviet tank fan, if you are a fan of casemate tanks, this one here should definitely be on your radar. If you're the type of person that digs the Jagdpanther, the Jagdtiger, even the T-28 Super Heavy Tank, this guy here would be an excellent addition to add to your collection. Outside of the casemate pattern of tanks, if you are just a fan of Cold War era vehicles, this kit here is also recommended. The subject matter being what it is, a casemate version of the T-54, it is just something that is so cool, so unique, and this is just a really nice eye-catching piece to add to your collection. Of course, I would recommend this model for anyone who's into dioramas. Of course, basically every tank kit out there is good for a diorama, sending one flavor or another. This one over here is definitely more so than others, and that's because of the way the kit's executed. With the suspension being the way it is, where it's separately molded and you can even have it be functional, this opens up the possibilities where you can depict this tank on several different terrain types, and this will greatly enhance the scene as a whole. In addition to the other aspects of the kit being the subject matter is really cool, but also with the way the kit's executed, where you have all the hatches that are separate molding, this allows you, if you so choose to do so, to throw in an engine compartment interior or a fighting compartment interior, and you could work that into the scene in one way, shape, or form or another. Of course, this is best left up to discretion of the artist at hand. However, this kit here is an excellent candidate to do so. Of course, the last person I would recommend this kit to is anyone who's an avid fan of the Russian T-54 and T-55 family. If you have the Terrans, if you have the Type 59s, and all the other variants of the T-55 that have been produced over the years by different countries, the addition of this kit over here is definitely going to be a no-brainer, and it will act as a nice little spot filler in your collection. And with that, that wraps up this model showcase video for this 1/35th scale Soviet early pattern SU-122-54. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being 1/35th scale model showcase videos like the one you just watched, or the other larger scale project update videos that frequently get posted. Another way to keep in loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There, I have more photographs of this particular build, as well as photographs of the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been seen on the channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks again, and I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. Till then.